I'm Sarah Mitchell, 28, 8 months pregnant with my first child. Last Saturday, while doubled over with what I thought were Braxton Hicks contractions, my mother-in-law handed me a mop and said, "Pregnancy isn't an excuse to be lazy." My husband nodded along as his family watched me scrub floors between waves of pain that were growing stronger by the hour. I spent years trying to earn their acceptance, believing I wasn't good enough for their golden boy. But as I gripped that bathroom counter, breathing through another contraction, something shifted inside me. The pain wasn't just physical anymore, it was the awakening I'd been avoiding for 3 years of marriage. What happened in the next 6 hours would expose the truth about my husband's family, my marriage, and the strength I never knew I possessed. Sometimes it takes being pushed to your breaking point to discover who you really are. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, this story is for you. I never planned to marry into money. Growing up in Millbrook, a town where the biggest excitement was the Friday night football games, I thought happiness meant finding someone who made you laugh and treated you kindly. I was a third-grade teacher at the local elementary school, content with my small apartment above the bakery and my weekend trips to the farmer's market. Then Michael walked into my classroom during parent-teacher conferences, even though he didn't have a child in my class. He was filling in for his sister who couldn't make it, he explained, flashing that devastating smile that would later become my weakness and my trap. He was visiting from the city, temporarily staying with family while transitioning between jobs. "You're not what I expected," he said after we'd discussed his nephew's progress. "I mean, you're so much more than just a teacher." I should have asked what he meant by just a teacher, but I was 25 and flattered by attention from this polished man with his expensive watch and confident demeanor. Within 6 months, he'd moved back to Millbrook permanently, claiming he wanted a quieter life. Within a year, we were engaged. The wedding photo sits in its gilded frame on the Mitchell family mantle, a constant reminder of the woman I tried to become. In it, I am beaming in my modest dress, the one Eleanor later called quaint, in that particular tone that made compliments sound like insults. Michael looks handsome and proud, surrounded by his family's wealth and social standing. I remember staring at that photo during our first Christmas as newlyweds, wondering when I'd started feeling like an imposter in my own life. Eleanor had spent the entire visit correcting my table settings, suggesting I might want to elevate my wardrobe, and sharing stories about Michael's accomplishments that somehow always ended with subtle digs at my background. "Sarah's still learning our family traditions," she'd say with a smile that never reached her eyes. It's so sweet how different her upbringing was. Michael never defended me. He'd just laugh it off or change the subject, leaving me to wonder if I was being too sensitive. Maybe this was normal. Maybe this was how wealthy families showed love through correction and gentle mockery disguised as guidance. I threw myself into becoming the perfect Mitchell daughter-in-law. I quit my teaching job when Eleanor suggested that Michael's career should take priority. I enrolled in cooking classes to learn the elaborate meals his family expected. I studied wine pairings and interior design, desperate to prove I belonged. In their world, the small apartment above the bakery was replaced by Michael's family home, a sprawling colonial that his parents had gifted us as a wedding present. "To help you both get started," his father had said, though the implication was clear. We were expected to maintain it to Mitchell standards. Learned to iron Michael's shirts the way his mother had taught him. I memorized his family's dietary restrictions and preferences. I hosted dinner parties where I smiled and nodded while his relatives discussed people and places I'd never heard of, laughing at inside jokes that predated my existence in their lives. But the woman in that wedding photo haunts me now. She looked so hopeful, so convinced that love would be enough to bridge any gap. She believed that if she just tried hard enough, if she just became perfect enough, she would earn her place in this family dot she had no idea that some people view love as a transaction, acceptance as something to be earned rather than freely given. She couldn't see that the very qualities that had attracted Michael, her independence, her career, her strength, were exactly what his family would spend the next 3 years trying to erode. Looking back, I wonder if Michael ever really loved me, or if he loved the idea of rescuing a small-town teacher and molding her into his family's image of an appropriate wife. The distinction matters more than I ever imagined it would. Michael's MBA diploma hangs in his home office like a shrine to family pride. Harvard Business School, magna cum laude, class of 2018. It's the first thing visitors see when they enter. The room positioned perfectly to catch the light streaming through the tall windows. Sometimes I catch Eleanor dusting the frame herself, as if touching it might transfer some of its prestige to her fingertips. Michael was always destined for greatness. She told me during our engagement party, her hand resting possessively on his shoulder. Even as a child, he had such focus, such ambition. We always knew he'd accomplish extraordinary things. I smiled and nodded, playing the role of the proud fiancé, but something in her tone made my chest tighten. It wasn't just maternal pride, it was a warning. A reminder that I was marrying someone exceptional, someone whose success I could never match. Comparisons started subtly. During family dinners, Eleanor would mention Rebecca casually, weaving her into conversations like she was still part of the family fabric. Rebecca, Michael's college girlfriend who'd broken up with him senior year to pursue her own career in international law. Rebecca always understood the demands of Michael's schedule. Eleanor would say while I struggled to hide my frustration about another canceled date night. She was so supportive of his ambitions. Or Rebecca had such sophisticated taste. She helped Michael choose his first apartment in the city, such an eye for quality. Michael never corrected his mother's nostalgic reminiscing. He'd just smile that diplomatic smile and change the subject, leaving me to wonder what he really thought about these constant references to his ex-girlfriend. I tried to learn more about Rebecca, partly out of curiosity and partly out of some masochistic need to understand what I was being measured against. The pictures had been carefully removed from Michael's social media, but Eleanor's photo albums told the story, a stunning brunette with an easy confidence, photographed at family events, vacation homes, and business functions. She looked like she belonged in their world in a way I never would. She's working for the State Department now, Eleanor mentioned during one particularly painful dinner. Such important work. Michael, didn't you say she was being considered for an assignment in Switzerland? Mom, Michael finally said, his voice carrying a warning I rarely heard him use with his family. But the damage was done. The message was clear. Rebecca was out there living an extraordinary life, making a difference in the world, while I had given up my teaching career to manage Michael's household and attend charity. Luncheons where I smiled politely and wrote checks from his family's account. The psychological warfare was subtle but relentless. When I expressed interest in returning to teaching, Eleanor would purse her lips and mention how demanding Michael's career was, how important it was for him to have stability at home. When I suggested we take a vacation, just the two of us, she'd remind him of some family obligation or business opportunity that couldn't be missed. Sarah doesn't really understand the corporate world, she'd say with that sympathetic smile. It's not her fault, she comes from such a different background. Michael never defended me in these moments. He'd nod thoughtfully as if his mother's observations about my inadequacies were worth serious consideration. Sometimes he'd pat my hand in a way that felt more patronizing than affectionate. Mom has a point, he'd say later when I tried to discuss my frustration. Maybe you should focus on understanding my world better before making big decisions about our future, his world. Not our world, his dot. I started noticing other things. How he'd light up when discussing business deals with his father, using language I couldn't follow. How he'd check his phone during our conversations, but never during calls with his mother. How he'd introduce me at networking events with a slight hesitation, as if he couldn't quite figure out how to explain my presence in his life. The MBA diploma became a symbol of everything I wasn't. I didn't have advanced degrees or important connections. I hadn't been groomed for success from childhood or taught to navigate corporate hierarchies. I was just a small-town teacher who'd been foolish enough to think that love might be more important than pedigree. But Michael was the golden boy, the family success story, the son who could do no wrong. And I was increasingly feeling like a footnote in his narrative, a temporary detour before he found someone more suitable, someone more like Rebecca, who could match his ambitions and meet his family's expectations. The worst part was how I started to believe them. I began questioning my own instincts, my own worth. Maybe I was holding Michael back. Maybe I was too simple, too ordinary for someone destined for greatness. I didn't realize then that greatness without kindness is just successful cruelty, and that a man who wouldn't defend his wife to his family would eventually fail to protect her from much worse. The contraction timer app on my phone showed a pattern I'd been ignoring for 3 hours. Contractions every 8 minutes, lasting 45 seconds each. I kept telling myself they were Braxton Hicks. Practice contractions that every pregnancy book assured me were normal at 36 weeks. Real labor would be unmistakable, they said. I'd know the difference, but as I gripped the kitchen counter Saturday morning, breathing through another wave of tightening that seemed to start in my lower back and wrap around my entire torso, a small voice in my head whispered what I wasn't ready to admit. This felt different. "Sarah, are you all right?" Michael asked, looking up from his laptop where he was reviewing quarterly reports. His concern seemed genuine, but I caught the slight irritation in his voice, the same tone he used when I interrupted his work calls. "Just false labor," I managed, forcing a smile. "The books say it's completely normal." He nodded and returned to his screen, trusting my assessment because admitting otherwise would disrupt his perfectly planned Saturday. His mother was arriving at noon for our monthly family dinner, and his sister Jennifer would be bringing her twin boys. The house needed to be spotless, the meal needed to be perfect, and any suggestion that I was actually in labor would throw the entire day into chaos. I couldn't do that to them. Not again. 3 months ago, I'd had what I thought was a miscarriage. Scare bleeding and cramping that sent me to the emergency room in tears. It turned out to be nothing serious, just one of those pregnancy complications that sounds terrifying, but resolves on its own. But Eleanor had made her feelings clear about my dramatics. Some women handle pregnancy more gracefully than others, she'd said to Michael, though she made sure I could hear every word. My generation didn't run to the hospital every time we felt uncomfortable. The timer on my phone buzzed again. 7 minutes this time. I deleted the app and shoved the phone into my pocket, refusing to acknowledge what the decreasing intervals might mean. The Mitchell family had traditions, and Saturday dinners were sacred. Eleanor would arrive with her white gloves and her mental checklist of everything that needed to be criticized. Michael's father would settle into his favorite chair with the newspaper and expect lunch to appear at precisely 1 o'clock. Jennifer would drop her boys off and disappear for a few hours of shopping, leaving everyone else to manage 2 hyperactive 8-year-olds. And I would smile and serve and clean up afterward, because that's what good wives do. That's what Mitchell wives do. Another contraction hit as I was taking the roast out of the oven. This one was stronger, making me gasp and almost drop the pan. The meat thermometer clattered to the floor as I gripped the counter, my knuckles white against the granite. "Careful," Michael said without looking up. "That roast cost $60. The pain peaked and slowly faded, leaving me shaky and nauseous. I picked up the thermometer with trembling hands, noting absently that it had cracked. Like everything else in this house, it would need to be replaced with something perfect, something worthy of the Mitchell standards. My water hadn't broken. I wasn't bleeding. The baby was still moving normally. I'd felt several strong kicks during the mornings. Contractions. This couldn't be real labor. Real labor would be obvious, wouldn't it? It would be the dramatic, movie-style experience where your water breaks in the grocery store and you know beyond doubt that your baby's coming. This was just discomfort. Just my body preparing for the real thing, which was still weeks away. The doctor said first babies almost always come late. I had time. I had to have time. Eleanor's car pulled into the driveway at exactly noon. Her silver Mercedes gleaming in the autumn sunlight. Through the window, I watched her check her appearance in the rearview mirror, adjusting her pearls and smoothing her perfect silver hair. She moved with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her place in the world, never questioned whether she belonged. "Mom's here," Michael announced unnecessarily, already moving toward the door to greet her. I noticed he straightened his shoulders and ran a hand through his hair. Even he wasn't immune to Eleanor's ability to make people feel like they needed to perform. As another contraction built slowly in my lower back, I forced myself to stand straight and put on the smile I perfected over 3 years of marriage. Whatever was happening with my body, it would have to wait. The Mitchell family dinner was about to begin, and nothing, not even the possibility that I was in labor, could be allowed to disrupt their perfect Saturday routine. I just needed to get through the next few hours. Then I could figure out whether these contractions meant something or if I was just being the dramatic, overly sensitive woman Eleanor believed me to be. Asterisk. Eleanor's white gloves emerged from her purse like a magician revealing the prop that would make her audience's dignity disappear. She'd worn them to every inspection of my housekeeping since our first month of marriage, claiming they were necessary to check for dust in hard-to-reach places. I've learned to recognize the gloves as a weapon of psychological warfare. Pristine white cotton that would reveal every speck of imperfection in my domestic performance. "Sarah, dear," she said, not bothering with hello, as she surveyed my kitchen with the critical eye of a health inspector. "I hope you don't mind, but I brought my little checklist today. Michael mentioned you've been feeling tired lately with the pregnancy, and I thought it might be helpful to make sure nothing important is being overlooked." She pulled out a typed list, actually typed on her vintage typewriter, because Eleanor believed handwriting lacked proper authority. I caught a glimpse of line items: baseboards dusted, light fixtures cleaned, refrigerator interior sanitized. My heart sank as I realized the scope of her expectations. "Mom, that's really not necessary," Michael started, but Eleanor cut him off with a wave of her gloved hand. "Nonsense, Michael. A clean home is the foundation of a happy family. Besides, Sarah needs to prepare for the baby's arrival. We can't have a newborn coming home to anything less than perfection." As if summoned by the word perfection, another contraction began building in my lower back. I pressed my lips together and focused on breathing steadily, hoping no one would notice the way I was gripping the edge of the kitchen. Eleanor ran her gloved finger along the top of the refrigerator, then examined it with theatrical disappointment. "Oh, Sarah, I'm afraid this simply won't do. And look at these baseboards. When did you last give them proper attention?" I wanted to point out that I was 36 weeks pregnant and could barely see my own feet, let alone clean baseboards that required crawling around on hands and knees. But I'd learned that explanations were viewed as excuses in the Mitchell household, and pregnant women were expected to maintain the same standards as everyone else. "I can take care of that today," I said quietly, already calculating how long it would take to complete her list while dealing with increasingly frequent contractions. "Wonderful." Eleanor beamed as if I'd volunteered for a delightful activity rather than submitted to domestic servitude. "I've brought all the proper supplies. You know how particular I am about cleaning products." She began unpacking an arsenal of specialized cleaners from her oversized handbag: wood polish, glass cleaner, disinfectant, and something called grout revitalizer that came with its own set of brushes. Each bottle was arranged on my counter, like surgical instruments laid out for an operation. The bathroom needs complete attention, she continued, consulting her list. I noticed last time that the grout between the shower tiles has developed some discoloration, and the floors throughout the house need a thorough mopping. I'll want to see them gleaming. Another contraction hit, stronger than the last. I found myself leaning against the counter, trying to breathe through the tightening sensation that felt like someone was slowly closing a belt around my entire torso. The pain peaked and gradually faded, leaving me slightly dizzy. "Are you listening, Sarah?" Eleanor's voice cut through my concentration. I said the floors need to be mopped with hot water and a cup of white vinegar. It's the only way to achieve proper sanitation. Yes, of course, I managed, though I'd missed half of what she'd said while focusing on not crying out during the contraction. Michael was checking his phone, completely oblivious to my distress. When he looked up and saw me leaning against the counter, he frowned slightly. "You look tired, Sarah. Maybe you should have gotten more sleep last night instead of staying up reading those pregnancy books." The implication stung, that my discomfort was self-inflicted, a result of poor choices rather than the physical reality of growing a human being while my body prepared for labor. Eleanor nodded approvingly at her son's observation. "Pregnancy isn't an excuse for neglecting responsibilities," she said, pulling on her second glove with practiced efficiency. "My generation understood that life goes on regardless of our condition. We didn't use pregnancy as a reason to lower our standards." I stared at her perfectly styled hair, her crisp blazer, her judgmental expression, and felt something crack inside my chest. Not break, not yet, but develop a hairline fracture that would eventually split wide open. "Where would you like me to start?" I asked, because that's what good Mitchell wives did. They asked where to start cleaning, not whether cleaning was reasonable when they might be in early labor. Eleanor smiled, the satisfied expression of someone whose authority has been acknowledged. "The bathroom, I think. It's the most important room to have properly sanitized before the baby arrives." "And Sarah?" She fixed me with a look that was meant to appear maternal but felt predatory, to try to be thorough. "We want everything perfect for our first grandchild." As I gathered the cleaning supplies, another contraction began building. I closed my eyes briefly, wondering how many more I would have to endure while scrubbing grout and mopping floors to Eleanor's impossible standards. White gloves would remain spotless, of course. They always did. The bathroom floor was cold against my knees as I scrubbed the grout around the bathtub with Eleanor's special brush. Each stroke sent vibrations through my swollen belly, and I had to pause every few minutes when contractions made it impossible to coordinate my movements. The cleaning solution's chemical smell made my pregnancy-sensitive stomach churn, but I forced myself to continue, determined not to give Eleanor more ammunition for her criticism. "A little more elbow grease on that corner, dear," she called from the doorway, where she stood supervising with her arms crossed. I can still see some discoloration. I bit back the response that the discoloration was probably permanent staining from years of use, something that no amount of scrubbing would eliminate. Instead, I applied more pressure, ignoring the way the motion made my lower back ache even worse as another contraction began building. This one stronger than any I'd experienced yet. I felt it start deep in my pelvis and spread outward like ripples in a pond, tightening every muscle in my torso. My breathing became shallow and quick as I tried to continue scrubbing through the pain. "Sarah, you're not making progress," Eleanor observed. "Perhaps you need better technique." I couldn't respond. The contraction peaked, making me grip the edge of the bathtub so hard my knuckles went white. For a moment, I thought I might vomit from the intensity. When it finally faded, I realized I was shaking. "I need a quick break," I whispered, sitting back on my heels. "Nonsense. You've barely started. At this rate, you'll be here all day." Eleanor stepped into the bathroom and examined my work with a critical eye. Look at this section here, you've completely missed it. And the toilet base needs attention too. Really, Sarah, I don't understand why such simple tasks seem so challenging for you. I wanted to scream that nothing about this was simple, that I was exhausted and in pain and possibly in labor, and that maybe, just maybe, cleaning grout wasn't the most important thing happening in my life right now. But the words stuck in my throat, choked by 3 years of conditioning that taught me my discomfort, was always secondary to the family's expectations. Moving to the kitchen was worse. The floor seemed to stretch endlessly before me, every tile, requiring individual attention according to Eleanor's standards. I filled the mop bucket with hot water and vinegar, the steam making me lightheaded as another contraction built. This time I couldn't hide it. I doubled over, one hand pressed against my lower back, the other gripping the kitchen counter. The pain was different now, sharper, more focused, accompanied by pressure that made me feel like I needed to sit down immediately. Oh, for heaven's sake. Eleanor sighed from her perch at the kitchen table, where she was drinking tea and observing my work. You're being quite theatrical, Sarah. It's just a backache. It's not, I started to say, but another wave of pain cut off my words. I pressed my forehead against the cool granite countertop. Trying to breathe through it, Michael appeared in the doorway, finally looking up from his work. What's going on? Your wife is making quite a production of cleaning the floor, Eleanor answered before I could speak. I've explained that pregnancy isn't an excuse for dramatics, but she seems determined to turn every task into an ordeal. Sarah, Michael's voice carried more annoyance than concern. Can you keep it down? I'm trying to finish this proposal. I stared at him, my husband of 3 years, the father of the baby I was possibly delivering while scrubbing his mother's floors. He was more worried about his work being interrupted than about why his heavily pregnant wife was doubled over in pain. I think I began, but Eleanor cut me off. What you think is that you can get out of household responsibilities by putting on a show, she said sharply. I raised 4 children, Sarah. I know the difference between real labor and attention-seeking behavior. The kitchen floor stain that had been bothering me for months seemed to mock me as I knelt beside it with the scrub brush. It was a permanent mark where Michael had spilled red wine weeks ago, something that had set into the grout and resisted every cleaning attempt. No matter how hard I scrubbed, how many products I tried, it remained a blemish on my perfect Mitchell home that served as daily evidence of my failure as a housekeeper. Now, as I attacked it with Eleanor's special grout cleaner, each scrub sent shockwaves through my contracted abdomen. The stain blurred through my tears of pain and frustration. Like everything else in this house, it demanded perfection while offering no forgiveness for human imperfection. That stain is never coming out, I said quietly, more to myself than to Eleanor. Not with that attitude, she replied crisply. In my day, we didn't give up so easily. We understood that maintaining a home required dedication and proper effort. As I scrubbed through another contraction, I wondered if Eleanor was right about more than just the stain. Maybe some marks really were permanent. Maybe some damage couldn't be cleaned away, no matter how much effort you applied or how desperate you were to make things perfect again. The realization should have been devastating, but instead, it felt oddly liberating. The teaching award was hidden behind winter coats in the hall closet, shoved there during one of Eleanor's early visits when she'd made a cutting remark of participation trophies. But as I stumbled toward the bathroom during another contraction, my hand brushed against something hard behind the coats, and I remembered what I'd lost along with everything else. Outstanding Educator of the Year, Sarah Mitchell. The engraved plaque felt heavy in my hands, heavier than it should have been. For a piece of wood and metal, I'd won it just 2 months before my wedding. Recognition for a reading program I'd developed that helped struggling 3rd graders improve their comprehension scores by 40%. The principal had called me a natural teacher with an instinctive understanding of how children learn. I used to be someone who mattered to people other than the Mitchells. Another contraction hit as I gripped the plaque. This one so intense that I cried out involuntarily. The sound echoed off the bathroom tiles, and I heard footsteps approaching quickly. "Sarah, what was that noise?" Michael appeared in the doorway, his face showing the first real concern I'd seen all day. I couldn't answer immediately. The contraction was different this time, accompanied by a sensation I'd read about but never experienced. A feeling like something was shifting, moving downward, preparing to the gush of warm fluid soaking through my pants, answered the question I'd been avoiding all day. My water had broken right there on the bathroom floor I'd spent the morning scrubbing. "Oh God," I whispered, staring down at the puddle forming around my feet. "Michael, my water just broke." For a moment, he just stared. Then his face went pale. "Are you sure? Maybe you just unsure." Another contraction was already building, stronger and more urgent than any before. "We need to go to the hospital now." But even as I said it, I could hear Eleanor's voice, carrying from the kitchen where she was directing the setting of the dining room table. Michael's sister had arrived with her boys, and the sound of children laughing mixed with the clatter of dishes and silverware. The perfect family dinner was about to begin. "Maybe we should wait a bit," Michael said, his voice uncertain. "I mean, first babies take forever, right? And Mom has everything planned for lunch." I stared at him in disbelief. "Michael, my water broke. The baby is coming. But you're not due for another month. Maybe it's not just anything." The words came out sharper than I intended, carrying 3 years of suppressed frustration. "I've been having contractions all morning, and now my water has broken. This is happening whether it's convenient for your family or not." Eleanor appeared behind Michael, her perfectly lipsticked mouth pursed in disapproval. "What's all this shouting about? And why is there water all over my clean floor?" "Sarah thinks she's in labor," Michael explained, as if my condition was a matter of opinion rather than biological fact. Eleanor's expression shifted from annoyance to skepticism. "Thinks? Sarah dear, you're barely 8 months along. This is probably just more false labor, like that episode a few months ago when you made us all panic for nothing." "This is not false labor," I said through gritted teeth as another contraction peaked. "My water broke. Feel free to examine the evidence yourself." "There's no need for sarcasm," Eleanor replied coolly. "But I do think you're being rather dramatic. First babies rarely come early, and certainly not this early. You're probably just experiencing some normal discomfort. Normal discomfort. As if the tightening sensation that made me want to drop to my hands and knees was something I should politely ignore to avoid inconveniencing anyone. "Besides," she continued, "Jennifer just arrived with the boys, and I've prepared a lovely meal. Surely this can wait until after lunch? Even if you are in labor, which I doubt, these things take hours and hours. Plenty of time to eat and visit properly." I looked at Michael, waiting for him to override his mother's insanity, to take charge of the situation and get me to the hospital. Instead, he was checking his watch and looking toward the dining room where his family was gathering. "Mom might have a point," he said slowly. "I mean, we don't want to rush to the hospital and sit there for 12 hours if this turns out to be another false alarm. Maybe we should just see how you feel after lunch." The teaching award was still in my hand, its weight now feeling like an anchor to the person I used to be. The woman who had won this award, who had advocated for her students, who had fought for funding for her reading program, who had stood up to administrators and parents when necessary, would never have tolerated this conversation. That woman would have called an ambulance herself if her husband was too worried about disrupting a family meal to take her to the hospital while she was in labor. As I stood there in my soaked pants, holding the reminder of my former strength, I felt something crack open inside me. Not just physically, though another contraction was building that would soon have me on my knees, but emotionally. The careful facade I'd constructed to fit into this family was finally crumbling under the weight of their complete indifference to my well-being. You know what? I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. You're absolutely right. This can wait. But I wasn't talking about the labor anymore. I made it through 20 minutes of Eleanor's pot roast before collapsing. The contractions had become so intense that I couldn't pretend anymore. I'd been gripping the edge of the dining room table, trying to smile through conversations about Michael's quarterly projections and Jennifer's boys' soccer season, when suddenly the pain became overwhelming. Not just physical pain, though that was crushing, but the emotional agony of sitting at this table while my body prepared to deliver my child, and nobody seemed to care. I need to go to the hospital, I announced during a lull in conversation about vacation home renovations right now. Eleanor looked up from her plate with mild irritation. Sarah, we're in the middle of lunch. Surely this can wait until we've finished eating? No, it can't. I stood up slowly, one hand pressed against my lower back. My contractions are 3 minutes apart. The baby is coming today. 3 minutes? Michael's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Are you sure you're timing them correctly? Before I could answer, another contraction hit with such force that I gasped and had to grip the back of my chair. This time I couldn't stay quiet. A low moan escaped my lips as the pain peaked. Jennifer finally looked concerned. Michael, maybe you should take her in just to be safe. But we haven't had dessert yet, Eleanor protested. I made my famous apple tart specifically for today. I stared at her in amazement. My water had broken. I was having contractions every 3 minutes, and she was worried about dessert being served on schedule. The apple tart will keep, I said, my voice tight with pain and disbelief. Your grandchild will not wait for your dinner timeline? Eleanor's expression hardened. There's no need to be rude. Sarah, I was simply suggesting that first-time mothers often mistake normal pregnancy discomfort for actual labor. Perhaps you should consider whether this urgency is really necessary. That's when my body made the decision. For all of us. Another contraction hit, stronger than any before, and suddenly I was on my knees beside the dining room table, unable to stand or speak or pretend this was anything other than what it was. Jesus, Sarah. Michael was finally moving, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Why didn't you say it was this bad? I wanted to laugh through the pain. I had been saying it was this bad for hours. They just hadn't been listening. Ride to the hospital was a blur of Michael's panic driving and me trying not to scream during contractions. He kept apologizing. I'm sorry, I didn't realize. Mom said first babies take forever, as if his mother's opinions were medical facts that overrode the reality of my labor. By the time we reached the emergency room, I could barely walk. A nurse took one look at me and called for a wheelchair, her professional demeanor shifting to urgent efficiency when I explained my symptoms. Water broke 3 hours ago. Contractions every 2 to 3 minutes, she repeated as she wheeled me toward labor and delivery. And you waited this long to come in because family dinner, Michael said, as if this explained everything. The nurse stopped pushing the wheelchair and turned to stare at him. I'm sorry, what? His mother thought I was being dramatic. I managed between contractions. She said first babies take forever and I should wait until after lunch. Dr. Martinez, my obstetrician, arrived within minutes of our admission. After a quick examination, her expression grew serious. Sarah, you're at 7 centimeters, she announced. This baby is coming very soon. How long have you been having regular contractions? Since this morning, maybe 6 hours. And you've been at home this entire time? Her tone was carefully neutral, but I caught the concern in her eyes. We were told it was false labor, Michael explained quickly. My mother has 4 children, and she said, your mother is not a medical professional. Dr. Martinez interrupted sharply. Waiting this long with a pregnancy at 36 weeks was extremely risky. Your wife could have delivered at home without medical assistance. The word risky seemed to finally penetrate Michael's family dinner fob. Risky how? Premature babies can have complications, respiratory issues, feeding problems, temperature regulation difficulties. Plus, Sarah has been in active labor for hours without proper monitoring. We need to move quickly now. As they prepared me for delivery, I caught sight of my hospital bracelet. Sarah Mitchell, high-risk labor, emergency admission. The plastic band around my wrist was proof of what I'd known all along. This was real. This was urgent, and waiting for Eleanor's apple tart could have cost my baby his life. A young nurse was adjusting my four when she leaned close and spoke quietly. Mrs. Mitchell, I need you to know that what happened today, being told to wait, being dismissed when you knew something was wrong, that's not okay. A woman knows her own body, and your concerns should have been taken seriously. Her words hit me like a revelation. Someone believed me. Someone validated what I'd experienced. After months of being told I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too demanding, here was a medical professional confirming that my instincts had been correct, and the people who claimed to love me had been dangerously wrong. Thank you, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. I thought I was going crazy. You're not crazy, she said firmly. You're a mother protecting her child. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. As another contraction peaked and I prepared to bring my son into the world, I realized this hospital bracelet was more than medical identification. It was evidence. Proof that my pain had been real, my instincts had been right, and the people who should have supported me had failed spectacularly. I wouldn't forget this lesson again. The first photo of my son was taken in the NICU, surrounded by machines and tubes that dwarfed his tiny body. Born at 4 pounds, 2 ounces, 3 weeks premature due to what the doctors called prolonged stress during labor, he looked impossibly fragile under the warming lights. I named him James, after my father who had died when I was 12. Michael wasn't consulted. He was on the phone with his office, explaining why he had missed Monday's meeting, and by the time he returned to my bedside, the nurses had already updated the paperwork. James? He asked, frowning at the name card taped to my bed. We discussed David after my grandfather. We discussed a lot of things, I replied quietly, not taking my eyes off the Polaroid the NICU nurse had given me. Most of them turned out differently than planned. James would spend the next 3 weeks in the hospital. 3 weeks of respiratory monitors and feeding tubes, of temperature regulation issues and blood sugar instability. 3 weeks of complications that Dr. Martinez explained could have been prevented with proper prenatal care and timely medical intervention. Stress during labor can affect premature babies significantly, she told us during the first frightening night when James's oxygen levels kept dropping. The delayed arrival at the hospital didn't help matters. Eleanor, when she finally visited, on day 3, seemed more concerned about the hospital's visiting policies than her grandson's condition. These rules are ridiculous, she complained, scrubbing her hands at the NICU sink. In my day, families could visit whenever they wanted, and why do we need to wear these gowns? It's all so excessive. She spent exactly 15 minutes looking at James through the incubator's plastic walls before declaring the NICU environment too depressing and retreating to the family waiting area. There, she held court with other visitors, explaining to anyone who would listen that premature births were often caused by maternal anxiety and failure to stay calm during pregnancy. Some women just don't handle the stress of pregnancy well. I overheard her telling Michael's aunt during one visit, Sarah has always been rather high-strung. We tried to keep her calm, but she insisted on making everything dramatic. I was pumping breast milk in the room next door, connected to a machine that made me feel more like livestock than a new mother. Every 2 hours, around the clock, I sat in that uncomfortable chair and tried to coax my body into producing enough nutrition for a baby I couldn't hold. Couldn't feed directly, couldn't comfort when he cried. The nurses were kind but honest about James's condition. His lungs were underdeveloped. His digestive system couldn't handle formula, so he needed my breast milk delivered through a feeding tube. His tiny body couldn't regulate its own temperature, requiring the artificial warmth of the incubator. He's fighting hard, Nurse Patricia told me during one of my late-night visits. But premature babies face challenges that full-term babies don't. Every day he stays strong is a victory. Every day was a victory that almost didn't happen because I'd been told to finish lunch before seeking medical care. Michael visited daily, but briefly. He'd stand beside the incubator, check his phone, and ask the nurses questions that focused more on timelines than James's well-being. When will he be able to come home? When can we get back to normal schedules? Normal? I asked him after one particularly insensitive conversation with Dr. Martinez about James's feeding difficulties. What part of this situation seems normal to you? I just meant, when will things settle down? When can we establish routines? I stared at him, this man who had been more concerned about disrupting his mother's dinner party than getting his. Laboring wife to the hospital. Our son is fighting for his life because we waited 3 hours longer than we should have. The only routine I care about is making sure he survives. Michael looked genuinely confused by my anger. The doctor said, "He's going to be fine. Kids are resilient. He'll catch up." He shouldn't have to catch up, I said quietly. He should have been born at full term, healthy and strong, if we'd handled things differently. You can't blame yourself for going into labor early, he replied, completely missing the point. These things just happen sometimes. But they didn't just happen. James was premature because I'd spent 6 hours in active labor being told I was being dramatic. Because I'd scrubbed floors and cleaned grout while my body tried to deliver a baby. Because everyone who claimed to love me had valued appearances and schedules more than medical reality. The photo of James in the NICU became my talisman, a reminder of the consequences of silence. Every time I looked at his tiny face surrounded by medical equipment, I remembered what it cost to prioritize other people's comfort over my own instincts. Eleanor never acknowledged her role in the delay. When James finally came home after 22 days in the hospital, her first comment was about how small he looked. "He'll need to catch up quickly," she announced, as if his size was a personal failing. Mitchell men are typically quite robust. I tucked the NICU photo into my wallet where I could see it every day. A reminder that some mistakes have consequences that can't be cleaned away, no matter how hard you scrub or how desperately you want to make things perfect again. And a promise that I would never again let anyone dismiss my concerns about my child's well-being. The get well cards started arriving on my 3rd day in the hospital, long before Michael's family had even acknowledged that anything serious had happened. Colorful envelopes addressed in children's handwriting, construction paper hearts decorated with glitter and stickers, hand-drawn pictures of flowers and rainbows with messages like, "We miss you, Mrs. Mitchell, and get better soon." My former students had organized a card-making campaign through their new teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, who had taken over my classroom after I'd resigned. Some of the children had included updates about their reading progress, proudly reporting that they'd finished chapter books or mastered difficult spelling words. Tommy read his first whole book yesterday, wrote 8-year-old Madison in purple crayon. He said he wishes you were here to see it because you taught him how. I cried reading that card, remembering Tommy's struggles with comprehension, how we'd work together every day after school until the words started making sense to him. I'd been part of something meaningful then, something that mattered beyond matching dinner plates and spotless baseboards. Nurse Patricia found me surrounded by colorful paper, tears streaming down my face as I read each message. "These are beautiful," she said, settling into the chair beside my bed. "You must have been quite a teacher." "I was," I said, and for the first time in 3 years, I said it without qualification or apology. I was good at it, really good. "What made you stop?" The question was simple, but the answer felt tangled in a web of expectations and compromises that had seemed reasonable at the time. My husband's family thought I should focus on supporting his career instead. They said teaching was a nice hobby, but not really important compared to his business responsibilities. Patricia's expression shifted. She was probably in her 50s, with kind eyes and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had seen everything during her decades in nursing. "And what did you think?" No one had asked me that question in 3 years. Not what was expected of me, not what would be best for Michael's career, not what would make his family happy. What did I think? "I think I made a mistake," I said quietly. "I think I gave up something important because I was told it wasn't important. And I think I've been trying to prove my worth in ways that were never going to work." Patricia nodded slowly. "Sometimes it takes a crisis to help us see clearly. Your body knew what it needed, even when the people around you didn't listen. Maybe your instincts are smarter than you've been giving them credit for." That afternoon, a social worker named Janet stopped by for what she called a routine postpartum check-in. She was younger than I'd expected, with a gentle manner that made it easy to talk. "How are you feeling about the support you received during labor?" she asked, pen poised over her clipboard. The question caught me off guard. "I'm sorry." Sometimes women experience complications during delivery that could have been prevented with different choices or support systems. "I'm just checking to make sure you have the resources you need going forward." I found myself telling her everything. About the hours of ignored contractions, the insistence that I was being dramatic, the delay in seeking medical care because it would disrupt a family dinner. Janet listened without judgment, taking notes and asking gentle follow-up questions. "Sarah, what you're describing is concerning," she said when I finished, dismissing a pregnant woman's concerns about her labor, especially to the point where medical care is delayed, can be a form of medical neglect. It can also be a warning sign of other controlling behaviors. "I don't think they meant to hurt me," I said automatically, then stopped. Why was I defending them? They had hurt me. They had put my baby at risk. Their intentions didn't change the consequences. Sometimes people don't mean to cause harm, but the impact is still significant, Janet replied. The important thing is recognizing patterns and making sure you have support systems that prioritize your well-being and that of your child. She left me with a packet of resources about postpartum support, domestic violence warning signs, and local counseling services. At the bottom of the stack was a pamphlet titled, "Trust Your Instincts, A Mother's Guide to Advocacy." That evening, as I sat surrounded by my students' cards and Janet's resources, I felt something shifting inside me. Not the physical changes that came with childbirth, but something deeper. A recognition that I had been valuable before I married Michael, that my instincts had been reliable before I learned to doubt them, that my voice had mattered before I learned to silence it. The woman who had won the teaching award, who had advocated for struggling readers, who had fought for her students' needs, she was still here, buried under 3 years of trying to be someone else. But still here, James was sleeping peacefully in his NICU incubator, monitored by machines that beeped reassuringly through the night. He was going to be okay, the doctor said. He was strong and determined, fighting his way toward health with the same tenacity his mother had once shown in her. Classroom. Maybe it was time for both of us to start fighting again. I picked up my phone and did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I called Mrs. Rodriguez to ask about substitute teaching opportunities. Not because Michael's family approved, not because it fit their timeline, but because I was a teacher and James deserved a mother who remembered her own worth. The house deed was in a manila folder tucked behind our tax returns, a document I'd never bothered to examine closely before. But sitting at Michael's desk while he was at work and James napped in his bassinet, I found myself reading every line of the property transfer that had occurred on our wedding day. Joint tenancy with rights of survivorship, the legal language stated clearly. Michael James Mitchell and Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell as equal owners, not gracious recipients of his family's generosity, not temporary residents dependent on their continued approval, equal owners of the house I've been cleaning and maintaining and apologizing for not keeping perfect enough. I'd never thought to look at the deed before because Eleanor had presented the house as a gift to Michael, something she was generously allowing me to share. "We want to help you children get started," she'd said on our wedding day, making it sound like charity rather than a legal property transfer that included my name. But there it was in black and white. I owned half of everything, half of the 4-bedroom colonial with its granite countertops and hardwood floors, half of the equity that had grown over 3 years of mortgage payments, half of the investment that Michael's family had treated as exclusively theirs to control. Photographed the deed with my phone, then kept digging through Michael's filing system. What else had I never been told about our finances? What other rights did I have that had been hidden behind his family's paternalistic management of our marriage? The investment portfolio was larger than I'd expected. The savings account showed regular contributions that included my former teaching salary, money I'd earned but never tracked after Eleanor convinced me that Michael handled all the complicated financial matters. My name was on every account, my signature required for major transactions. My social security number linked to assets I'd been told were beyond my understanding, but the most revealing discovery was tucked into a folder labeled Insurance Policies. A life insurance policy on Michael, purchased right after our wedding, with me as the primary beneficiary, and a matching policy on me, also purchased after our wedding, with Michael as the beneficiary. Someone had been planning for our financial future together, making sure we were both protected. That someone was Michael's financial advisor, who had clearly assumed we were equal partners in our marriage, rather than a benefactor and his grateful dependent. Eleanor's voice echoed in my memory. "Michael works so hard to provide for you. Sarah, you should be grateful for the security he offers." But the document spread across his desk told a different story. I hadn't been provided for, I'd been providing. My teaching salary, my signature on mortgage documents, my legal ownership of our shared assets. I'd been an equal partner who'd been convinced she was a charity case. The baby monitor crackled as James stirred in his crib upstairs. At 6 weeks old, he was finally sleeping for longer stretches, his premature lungs growing stronger every day. As I climbed the stairs to check on him, I thought about the home he was growing up in, a home that belonged as much to me as to his father. Regardless of what his grandmother had implied for 3 years, James was awake but content, his dark eyes tracking the mobile above his crib. When he saw me, his face broke into the early smile that made every sleepless night worthwhile. I picked him up, breathing in his sweet baby scent, and carried him to the window that overlooked our backyard. "See that garden, James?" I whispered against his soft hair. "I planted every flower out there, and see that fence? I painted it last summer while your daddy was at conferences. This house isn't just where we live, it's what we've built together." But even as I said it, I realized together might not be accurate anymore. Michael came home from work each day and immediately checked his phone. He helped with James when asked, but never initiated care. He listened to his mother's opinions about our parenting choices and presented them to me as suggestions we should seriously consider. During James's NICU stay, Michael had missed several visiting windows because of work commitments. He'd never questioned his mother's version of events that led to the premature delivery. He'd never acknowledged that her insistence on finishing lunch had endangered our son's health. She was just trying to help, he'd said when I brought it up. Mom has experience with babies. She didn't realize how serious it was, but the house deed told a different story about what I was entitled to, regardless of whether Michael's family realized how serious my concerns were. I was entitled to half of our shared property. I was entitled to make decisions about my own life and my child's well-being. I was entitled to trust my instincts without needing anyone's permission or approval. That afternoon, I called a lawyer whose name I found in the resources Janet had given me at the hospital. Not to file for divorce, not yet, but to understand my rights as a wife, mother, and joint property owner. I need to know what I'm legally entitled to, I told her during our phone consultation. I think I've been convinced I have less power in my marriage than I actually do. That's more common than you might think, she replied. Why don't we schedule a time to review your documents? Knowledge is power, and every woman should understand her legal position. As I hung up, James grabbed my finger with his tiny fist. His grip surprisingly strong for someone who'd started life so small and vulnerable. Maybe strength wasn't about size or volume or dramatic gestures. Maybe strength was about knowing your worth and refusing to accept less than you deserved. The house around us felt different now that I knew I owned half of it. The floors I'd scrubbed, the rooms I'd cleaned, the mortgage we'd paid, all of it was mine as much as anyone's. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like I was home. The voice recording app on my phone was surprisingly simple to use. Just press a button and it captured everything. The tone, the timing, the exact words that could later be dismissed as misremembering or exaggeration. I started using it during Eleanor's visits, keeping my phone in my pocket while she delivered her weekly critiques of my housekeeping and parenting. Sarah, dear, you really must do something about James's sleeping schedule, she announced during her first visit after his homecoming from the NICU. Babies need structure, and all this feeding on demand is just creating bad habits. I kept my voice level as I responded, knowing the phone was recording. The pediatrician said frequent feeding is important for premature babies. James needs to gain weight. Doctors these days coddle children too much, Eleanor replied dismissively. In my generation, we put babies on proper schedules from day one. Michael slept through the night at 6 weeks old. James was born 3 weeks early and spent nearly a month in the hospital. His needs might be different from Michael's were. That's exactly the kind of thinking that creates problems, Sarah. You're using his early birth as an excuse to be overly indulgent. Mark my words, you'll regret it when he's older. The recording captured not just her words, but her tone condescending, authoritative, dismissive of medical advice that contradicted her opinions. When I played it back later, I could hear my own voice getting smaller and more defensive with each exchange. The familiar pattern of doubt creeping in despite my rational knowledge that I was following doctor's orders. I started carrying a small notebook too, documenting the dates and details of these conversations. The time Michael sided with his mother about sleep training, despite James's pediatrician's warnings. The afternoon, Eleanor criticized my decision to breastfeed because it was too demanding on my body. The evening, she suggested that my emotional state was affecting my milk supply and maybe formula would be more stable. You seem tired lately, Sarah, Michael observed one evening as I fed James in the living room chair. Maybe Mom has a point about the schedule thing. If James slept better, you'd get more rest. James sleeps fine for a premature baby, I replied, adjusting the nursing pillow. Dr. Patterson said his eating and sleeping patterns are completely normal for his situation, but maybe we could try Mom's suggestions just to see if they help. She raised 4 kids successfully. I looked at my husband, this man who trusted his mother's decades-old parenting memories more than his son's current pediatrician's advice. Michael, James was in an ICU for 3 weeks because we ignored medical reality in favor of your mother's opinions once before. Are you seriously suggesting we do that again? His face flushed. That's not fair, Sarah. What happened during labor was nobody's fault. You can't keep bringing that up every time Mom tries to help. Help? I kept my voice quiet, aware that my phone was recording in my pocket. Is that what we're calling it when she undermines every decision I make about our son's care? She's not undermining anything. She's sharing her experience. Her experience from 30 years ago, which contradicts current medical advice about premature infant care. Michael sighed, the same exasperated sound he made when work calls ran long or traffic was heavy. You're being overly sensitive again, Sarah. Mom just wants what's best for James. The conversation followed the predictable pattern. Michael defending his mother's intrusion, me providing logical responses that were dismissed as oversensitivity, and both of us retreating to our respective corners without resolution. But this time, I had documentation. The family group text messages were even more revealing. I discovered them by accident when Michael left his phone on the kitchen counter while showering. A notification popped up from a group called Mitchell, family that apparently included everyone except me. Eleanor. Sarah seems overwhelmed with the baby. Maybe Jennifer could offer some guidance. Michael, she's still adjusting. The labor was pretty traumatic. Eleanor, I've tried to help with scheduling and feeding advice, but she's resistant to suggestions. Very stubborn. Jennifer, new moms can be defensive. Give her time. Eleanor, I'm just concerned she's not handling motherhood well. The house has been neglected, and she seems emotional about everything. Michael, I'll talk to her about getting help with cleaning. Eleanor, good. A messy house isn't healthy for the baby. I screenshotted the entire conversation before Michael finished his shower, my hands shaking as I captured proof of how they discuss me behind my back. Not as a family member who deserves support during a difficult transition, but as a problem to be managed and corrected. The most damning evidence came from Eleanor herself during one of her helpful visits. She was examining my refrigerator contents, claiming to check for expired items, when she made a comment that revealed everything. You know, Sarah, I keep hoping you'll grow into this role, but I'm starting to wonder if you're really suited for the Mitchell family lifestyle. Some people are just too set in their ways to adapt to higher standards. I kept folding baby clothes while she spoke, the recording app capturing every word. What do you mean by suited? I asked calmly. Well, the house maintenance issues, your resistance to helpful advice, this whole dramatic episode with the early labor. It makes me wonder if Michael might have been better suited to someone more ... compatible with our family's expectations. The words hung in the air like a slap. She was suggesting that my husband would be better off with someone else, someone more like Rebecca, presumably. Someone who wouldn't question her authority or require medical attention during labor. Are you saying Michael should have married someone else? I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. I'm saying that some matches work better than others, Eleanor replied carefully. Michael deserves a partner who enhances his life rather than complicating it. The recording captured the slight pause before she added, of course, that's all in the past now. We just have to make the best of the current situation. As if my marriage and my child were problems to be endured rather than relationships to be celebrated. That evening, I organized all my evidence in a private folder on my laptop. Audio recordings, screenshots of text messages, detailed notes about conversations and incidents. Not because I was planning anything specific, but because I was finally learning the lesson that crisis had taught me. My perceptions were valid. My concerns were legitimate, and I needed proof to protect myself from people who would gaslight me into doubting my own experiences. The lawyer, Carolyn Webb, had been right during our consultation. Documentation is crucial, she'd said. Emotional abuse often leaves no physical evidence, but patterns of behavior can be tracked and proven. If you ever need to demonstrate that your concerns were reasonable or that your decision-making was sound, you'll need more than just your word against theirs. As I saved the files and backed them up to a secure cloud account, I thought about the woman I'd been 3 years ago trusting, eager to please, willing to accept others' versions of reality over her own instincts. She wouldn't have thought to record conversations or screenshot messages. She would have continued doubting herself, accepting blame, and adapting to impossible standards. But that woman hadn't been ignored during labor. She hadn't watched her premature baby fight for life while her in-laws discussed dessert schedules. She hadn't discovered that her value to her husband's family was contingent on her silence and compliance. James stirred in his crib upstairs, probably ready for his next feeding. As I climbed the stairs to care for my son, I felt the weight of the phone in my pocket, not just a device for communication, but a tool for protection. Evidence that my truth was real, my experiences were valid, and my voice mattered. The woman who had won the teaching award was learning to advocate for herself the same way she'd once advocated for her students. And this time she wasn't going to let anyone convince her that her instincts were wrong. James's medical records filled a thick manila folder that documented every detail of his 3-week NICU stay. Page after page of oxygen saturation levels, feeding schedules, weight measurements, and medication dosages, all consequences of being born too early after a labor that was allowed to progress too long without medical intervention. Respiratory distress syndrome secondary to prematurity. Read Dr. Martinez's discharge summary. Complications likely preventable with earlier medical intervention during labor. I kept that folder in my bedside drawer, next to the photos from his first weeks of life. Not to torture myself, but as a reminder of what happened when I let other people override my instincts about my own body and my child's well-being. Eleanor arrived 30 minutes after we brought James home from the hospital, carrying a casserole, dish, and an armload of opinions about newborn care. "He's still so small," she announced, peering into the carrier where James slept peacefully. "Are you sure he's ready to be home?" "He looks quite fragile." "The doctors cleared him for discharge?" I replied, lifting James from his carrier. "His weight is good, his breathing is stable, and he's feeding well." "If you say so," Eleanor replied in a tone that suggested she had serious doubts about medical professionals' judgment. "I brought my old baby scales from when the children were young. We'll want to monitor his weight closely." I had already arranged for weekly weight checks with our pediatrician, but Eleanor had brought her vintage scale anyway, a reminder that she intended to supervise every aspect of James's care according to her standards rather than current medical recommendations. "The nursery looks adequate," she continued, following me upstairs for what I recognized as an inspection. "Though I'm concerned about the temperature. Babies need warmth, and this room feels chilly." The thermostat read exactly 72 degrees, the temperature recommended by James's NICU team, but Eleanor adjusted it to 76, explaining that her children had always been kept warmer. "Different generations have different approaches," I said carefully, making a mental note to readjust the temperature after she left. James's doctors gave us specific guidelines for his care. "Doctors don't live with babies day and night," Eleanor replied dismissively. "Experience trumps textbook knowledge, Sarah. You'll learn that as you go." Over the next several days, Eleanor's experience included criticism of nearly every aspect of my newborn care. She questioned my breastfeeding schedule, suggesting that formula would be more reliable for a premature baby. She criticized the frequency of James's feedings, claiming that I was creating bad habits by responding to his hunger cues. She even questioned my decision to keep James's bassinet in our bedroom, insisting that babies should learn independence from birth. "You're coddling him, Sarah," she announced during one particularly frustrating visit. Premature babies need extra structure, not extra indulgence. But James's medical records told a different story. His pediatrician, Dr. Patterson, had been clear about the specific needs of premature infants: frequent feedings to support weight gain, close monitoring for respiratory issues, and responsive caregiving to support neurological development. Premature babies actually benefit from extra attention and responsiveness, Dr. Patterson had explained during our first post-discharge visit. Their nervous systems are still developing, and consistent, nurturing care helps that process. When I shared this information with Eleanor, she pursed her lips disapprovingly. These modern doctors make everything so complicated. Babies are more resilient than they pretend. James spent 3 weeks on a ventilator, I reminded her quietly. His resilience has already been tested enough. Michael, as usual, avoided taking sides in these disagreements. When Eleanor questioned my parenting decisions, he would nod thoughtfully and suggest we consider all perspectives. When I cited medical advice that contradicted his mother's recommendations, he would remind me that Mom raised 4 healthy children. The breaking point came during James's 2-month checkup, when Dr. Patterson praised his development and weight gain. "You're doing everything right, Sarah," she told me as James cooed happily on the examination table. "His growth is excellent, his reflexes are strong, and his breathing is completely normal. Whatever you're doing at home is working perfectly." I shared this feedback with Michael that evening, hoping he might finally acknowledge that my approach to James's care was medically sound. "That's great news," he said absently, scrolling through emails on his phone, though Mom mentioned that James seems fussy during her visits. Maybe we should consider some of her suggestions about schedule and routine. I stared at him, my husband, who trusted his mother's impressions over his son's pediatrician's professional assessment. "Michael, the doctor said James is thriving. His fussiness during your mother's visits might be because she keeps trying to override his feeding schedule and hold him when he needs to sleep." "Mom just wants to help," he replied automatically. "No," I said quietly, "your mother wants to control." There's a difference. That night, as I fed James in the quiet darkness of his nursery, I thought about the medical records in my bedside drawer. Every page documented the consequences of ignoring maternal instincts in favor of family preferences. Every measurement showed what happened when medical reality was dismissed for social convenience. James looked up at me with his dark eyes, so alert and aware for a baby who had started life fighting for every breath. He was healthy now because I had finally learned to trust doctors over dinner schedules, medical advice over family traditions, and my own instincts over other people's opinions. I would not let anyone teach him that his needs were less important than their comfort. I would not let anyone convince him that his mother's voice didn't matter. And I would never again let anyone tell me that caring for my child according to medical recommendations was coddling or dramatic. The medical records were proof that some battles are worth fighting, especially when the people who claim to love you insist there's no battle at all. The family group text messages I wasn't supposed to see told the real story of what Michael's family thought about my mothering, my marriage, and my place in their lives. I discovered the conversation thread by accident when Michael's phone buzzed during James's bath time, and he asked me to check if it was important. The preview showed a message from Eleanor. "Sarah's really struggling with this whole motherhood thing." My finger hovered over the screen. I knew I shouldn't open it. I knew it would hurt, but I also knew that understanding how they talked about me when I wasn't present might finally give me the clarity I needed to understand my marriage. The conversation thread went back months. "Eleanor, I'm concerned about Sarah's emotional state since the baby. She seems overwhelmed and defensive about everything. Jennifer, postpartum is hard. Maybe she needs professional help." "Eleanor, I've tried to offer guidance, but she resists every suggestion, very stubborn. I worry about James's development if she doesn't improve. Michael, she's just tired, first-time mom anxiety. Eleanor, it's more than that, Michael. The house is a mess, she looks awful, and she gets snippy when I try to help with the baby. This isn't normal new mom behavior. Jennifer, have you considered that maybe your help feels like criticism to her? Eleanor, I'm helping her learn proper childcare. Someone has to teach her these things, and she obviously doesn't know them naturally. Michael, I'll talk to her about being more receptive to advice. Eleanor, good. Because honestly, I'm starting to wonder if she's equipped for this. Some women just aren't natural mothers. The words hit like physical blows, not natural mothers. Wasn't equipped for this. The woman who had ignored my labor pain and delayed my medical care was now questioning my fitness as a mother because I followed pediatric guidelines instead of her outdated advice. But the most devastating messages were the recent ones, Eleanor. I think Sarah's issues run deeper than postpartum adjustment. She's always been difficult and demanding. Remember the drama during her labor? Michael, Mom, that's not fair. Eleanor, I'm just saying maybe we need to face facts. This marriage might not be working out the way we hoped. Sarah clearly isn't adapting to our family expectations. Jennifer, are you suggesting Michael should leave his wife? Eleanor, I'm suggesting that some people aren't meant for certain lifestyles. Rebecca understood our family dynamics. Sarah fights them constantly. Michael, can we not do this, please? Eleanor, I'm thinking about what's best for James, Michael. Children need stability, not a mother who's constantly stressed and resistant to guidance. I screenshotted every message, my hand shaking as I documented my mother-in-law's campaign to convince my husband that I was an unfit mother and unsuitable wife. She wasn't just undermining my parenting decisions, she was actively working to destroy my marriage. The medical bills provided the final piece of evidence I needed. James's NICU stay had cost nearly $200,000, covered by insurance but itemized in shocking detail. Every day of oxygen support, every feeding tube, every medication required to stabilize a baby who had been born too early because adults couldn't prioritize medical care over social schedules. The bills were a paper trail of consequences, proof that dismissing maternal concerns had quantifiable costs. But more than that, they were evidence of Eleanor's fundamental lack of judgment about medical matters, the same judgment she was now using to question my fitness as a mother. I organized everything in a folder, the recorded conversations where Eleanor dismissed pediatric advice, the text messages revealing her campaign against my marriage, the medical records documenting James's preventable complications, and the financial statement showing my legal ownership of our shared assets, not because I was planning immediate action, but because I was finally learning to protect myself with facts rather than hoping other people would suddenly become reasonable. Carolyn Webb, my attorney, had prepared me for this moment during our consultations. Emotional manipulation often escalates when the victim starts showing independence, she'd warned. Document everything because people who gaslight you will deny conversations ever happened. Having proof protects your sanity as much as your legal position. The family's monthly dinner was scheduled for the following Saturday, the same gathering where Eleanor had insisted I clean floors while in labor 4 months earlier. This time, I would attend with full knowledge of what they really thought about me, armed with evidence of their patterns of dismissal and control. I wouldn't go in angry or defensive. I would go in prepared. James was sleeping peacefully in his crib, his breathing steady and strong. At 4 months old, he was thriving. Despite his early struggles, meeting every developmental milestone his pediatrician expected. He was proof that following medical advice instead of family traditions produced healthy outcomes. He was also proof that I was exactly the mother he needed, attentive, informed and willing to advocate for his well-being, even when it meant standing up to people who claimed to know better. The teaching award was back on my dresser now, no longer hidden behind winter coats, but displayed where I could see it every morning. A reminder that I had once been confident in my abilities, successful in my profession, and respected for my expertise. That woman was still here. She had just been temporarily silenced by people who needed her to doubt herself in order to maintain their control. Saturday's dinner would be her first public appearance in 3 years. And this time, she was bringing evidence. The divorce papers were already prepared when Michael came home 3 hours after the dinner confrontation. Not because I had planned to serve them that night, but because Carolyn Webb had taught me the importance of being prepared for every possible outcome when dealing with people who valued control over truth. "Sarah, we need to talk," Michael said, finding me in James's nursery where I was packing a diaper bag with methodical precision. "I agree," I replied without looking up from my task. "But first, you need to decide whether we includes your mother's opinion about what's best for our marriage." He sat heavily in the rocking chair I'd used for countless late-night feedings, the chair where I'd made the decision to stop accepting unacceptable treatment. "What you did tonight was humiliating. What I did tonight was tell the truth. If the truth is humiliating, maybe you should examine why that is. You ambushed my family with private documents and recordings. You made my mother look like some kind of villain." I finally looked at him directly. "Michael, your mother told a woman in active labor to finish cleaning before seeking medical care. She prioritized her dinner schedule over your son's safety. She spent 4 months questioning my fitness as a mother while campaigning for our marriage to fail. I didn't make her look like anything. I simply documented what she actually said and did." "She was trying to help," he said automatically, the same defense he'd been offering for 3 years. "Help with what?" "Help destroy my confidence. Help convince you that I'm unsuitable for your family. Help teach our son that his mother's medical instincts don't matter." Michael was quiet for a long moment, staring at the family photos scattered around James's room. Pictures of the 3 of us that looked happy but felt hollow now that I understood how precarious my place in this family had always been. "What do you want from me, Sarah?" "I want you to choose," I said simply, "between the wife who nearly died bringing your son into the world and the mother who thinks she could have done better. Between the partner who owns half of everything we've built together and the family that treats her like a temporary inconvenience. Between your marriage and your mother's approval. That's not fair. I shouldn't have to choose between my wife and my family." "You're right, you shouldn't. In a healthy family, wives are family. But your mother has made it clear that I'm not welcome unless I accept her authority over my own medical decisions and my child's care. She's made it clear that she thinks you'd be better off with someone else. So, yes, Michael, you do have to choose." I handed him the divorce papers, watching his face change as he read the legal language that would divide our shared life into separate assets and custody arrangements. "Sarah, please, don't do this. We can work things out." "Can we? Because your response to tonight's revelations was to defend your mother's behavior and criticize my methods of documenting it. You heard recordings of her dismissing medical advice that could have saved our son from weeks of life-threatening complications, and your concern was that it was humiliating to present evidence. I just think there are better ways to handle family conflicts." "Like what?" "Like continuing to let her undermine my parenting decisions while you stay neutral. Like pretending that nearly losing James was nobody's fault. Like accepting her assessment that I'm not suited for your family's lifestyle." Michael looked genuinely surprised. "When did she say that?" "It's all in the text messages, Michael. The ones where she questions my fitness as a mother, suggests our marriage was a mistake, and reminisces about how much better Rebecca would have been for you." I watched him process this information, seeing the moment he realized that his mother's helpful advice had been part of a broader campaign to drive me away. I didn't know about those messages, he said quietly, because you participated in a group chat that deliberately excluded me while discussing my marriage and my mothering. Because you allowed your family to evaluate my worth behind my back while pretending to my face that everything was fine. James stirred in his crib, making the soft sounds that meant he'd be awake soon for his evening feeding. I moved to pick him up, this beautiful child who had survived his difficult start and was thriving despite his grandmother's predictions that responsive parenting would spoil him. Look at him, Michael, I said, settling into the rocking chair. With James in my arms, look at how healthy and happy he is. Every decision I made that your mother criticized, the feeding schedule, the sleep arrangements, the medical care, all of it was right. I trusted pediatric advice over family tradition, and our son is thriving. I know you're a good mother, Michael said, and for the first time in our conversation, he sounded sincere rather than defensive. Then why didn't you defend me when your mother suggested otherwise? Why didn't you correct her when she blamed me for James's premature birth? Why didn't you shut down the conversation when she started planning your future with someone more suitable? Michael was quiet for a long time, watching me feed James and the peaceful routine we'd established despite his family's interference. I don't know, he admitted finally. I guess I've never questioned her authority before. She's always been so confident about everything. Confidence isn't the same as competence, Michael. Your mother was confident that I should clean floors during active labor. That doesn't make her medical advice valid. I adjusted James's position and looked at my husband, really looked at him. Perhaps for the first time since our wedding day. The question isn't whether your mother means well. The question is whether you're willing to prioritize our family over her approval. The divorce papers lay on the changing table between us, legal documents that would formalize what emotional distance had already accomplished, but I wasn't ready to file them yet. Despite everything, I wanted to give Michael one last chance to choose his wife and son over his mother's expectations. What would that look like? He asked. Boundaries, I said immediately. Clear, enforced. Boundaries about her involvement in our parenting decisions, our marriage, and our home. Consequences when she violates those boundaries. An absolute clarity that my voice matters more than her opinions when it comes to James's care. And if she won't accept that, then we'll know exactly how much our family means to her. And you'll know exactly how much our family means to you. James had finished eating and was looking up at me with those dark eyes that seemed to see everything. He would grow up knowing that his mother had fought for his well-being, even when it meant standing up to people who claimed to love him. He would learn that medical advice trumps family tradition, that maternal instincts deserve respect, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to accept unacceptable treatment. I need time to think, Michael said. Take all the time you need, I replied, but understand that I'm done thinking. I know exactly who I am, what I deserve, and what's best for James. The only question now is whether you want to be part of that future. The decision was his to make, but for the first time in 3 years, I was confident in mine. The new house keys felt different in my hand lighter somehow, even though they opened the door to a smaller space. The 2-bedroom rental across town wasn't much to look at from the outside, but it was mine in ways the Mitchell family home had never been. No one here would criticize my housekeeping or question my parenting decisions. No one would suggest that I wasn't suited for the lifestyle I was trying to maintain. I'd moved out 2 weeks after the confrontation at Eleanor's dinner table, taking James and everything that truly mattered to me. Michael had stood in our shared bedroom, his bedroom, now watching me pack with a confusion that would have been heartbreaking if I'd had any heartbreak left to spare. This doesn't have to be permanent, he'd said as I folded James's clothes into a suitcase. We can work through this. We can, I'd agreed. But not while your mother has unlimited access to our marriage and your first loyalty is to keeping her happy. When you're ready to prioritize our family over her approval, you know where to find us. The separation wasn't acrimonious. We'd agreed on temporary custody arrangements that prioritized James's routine and well-being. Michael could visit any time, and James would spend weekends at the house when he was older. But for now, while he was still nursing and needed consistent care, he would stay with me. Eleanor had not taken the news well. "This is exactly what I predicted," she told Michael. According to the conversation he'd reported to me with what seemed like genuine surprise at his mother's lack of sympathy, Sarah was never committed to making this marriage work. "She's using the baby to manipulate you. Mom, she moved out because you told her to scrub floors while she was in labor," Michael had finally said, showing the first signs of clarity I'd seen from him in 3 years. "I did no such thing," Eleanor had replied immediately. "I asked her to help with some light housekeeping." How was I supposed to know she was actually in labor when she'd been so dramatic about false alarms before? The gaslighting was so automatic, so seamless, that it would have made me doubt my own memories if I hadn't had recordings to prove exactly what had been said. But Michael had finally heard it for what it was, a complete rewriting of history to avoid. Accountability. My new rental house was furnished simply but comfortably. The living room had a rocking chair positioned by the window where I could feed James while watching the sunrise. The kitchen was tiny but functional, with a small table where I could grade papers once I started substitute teaching again. The second bedroom served as both nursery and home office, spaces I could organize according to my needs rather than someone else's standards. The teaching opportunities had materialized quickly once word spread that I was available for substitute work. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had taken over my former classroom, called within days of my separation. "Sarah, thank goodness," she'd said when I answered the phone. "I have a family emergency next week, and I've been desperate to find someone who knows the reading program you developed. The kids ask about you constantly." Walking back into Lincoln Elementary felt like coming home after a long, confusing journey. The hallways smelled like childhood crayons and cleaning supplies and the indefinable scent of learning. My former students, now fourth graders, surrounded me with hugs and excited chatter about their progress. Mrs. Mitchell. "Tommy can read whole chapter books now," Madison announced proudly. "And he writes stories about dragons and adventure." Tommy, the boy who had struggled so much with comprehension, beamed at me with the confidence of someone who had discovered his own capabilities. "I told Mrs. Rodriguez you taught me that reading was like solving puzzles, and now I love puzzles." Standing in that classroom, surrounded by children whose lives I'd touched and who remembered me fondly, I felt more valuable than I had during 3 years of trying to prove my worth to people who would never acknowledge it. The boundary setting with Michael's family was non-negotiable, but surprisingly straightforward once I stopped caring about their approval. Eleanor called the house repeatedly, demanding to speak with me about this ridiculous situation. I let every call go to voicemail, then deleted the messages without listening to them. When she showed up at my door unannounced, I spoke to her through the closed door. "Eleanor, I'm not receiving visitors today. If you'd like to schedule a time to see James, you can coordinate with Michael." "Sarah, open this door immediately. We need to discuss this nonsense you've put my son through." "No, we don't. Have a good day." The power of no was intoxicating after years of being told that saying no was rude, dramatic, or unreasonable. "No, you cannot criticize my parenting decisions. No, you cannot override medical advice with your opinions. No, you cannot come into my home and make me feel inadequate." Michael visited 3 times during the first week, each time looking more confused and lost than the last. During his 3rd visit, he sat on my small couch holding James and asked the question I'd been waiting for. "How do I fix this, Sarah? Tell me what you need me to do." "I need you to understand that choosing me doesn't mean rejecting your mother," I said carefully. "It means establishing boundaries that protect our family from her interference." It means backing up my parenting decisions even when they contradict her preferences. And it means acknowledging that what happened during my labor was wrong, dangerous, and completely preventable. I know it was wrong, he said quietly. I should have taken you to the hospital immediately when you said your water broke. You should have taken me seriously when I said I was having contractions, I corrected. The water breaking was just the moment when denial became impossible for everyone except your mother. Michael was quiet for a moment, absently stroking James's soft hair. She's not going to change, is she? Probably not. People who refuse to acknowledge when they're wrong rarely develop that skill later in life. The question is whether you're willing to manage her behavior instead of expecting me to tolerate it. What does that look like practically? It looks like you telling her that medical decisions about James are made by his parents and his pediatrician, period. It looks like you ending conversations when she criticizes my parenting or questions my fitness as a mother. It looks like you refusing to participate in group chats that exclude me but discuss my marriage. I paused, watching him process this list of concrete actions that seemed reasonable to me, but would require him to confront his mother in ways he'd never done before. And it looks like you moving out of the family home and into an apartment where she can't drop by unannounced, or rearrange our thermostat or inspect our housekeeping with white gloves. Move out? His surprise was genuine. But that house is our investment. That house is your mother's control center, I replied. She has keys, she considers it her territory, and she never respects boundaries while we're living in a space she sees as hers to manage. We can rent it out, but we can't have a marriage there. The conversation was difficult, but not impossible. For the first time in our relationship, Michael seemed willing to consider that his normal wasn't actually normal, that his mother's behavior wasn't actually helpful, and that preserving our marriage might require disappointing his family. But understanding and action were different things. Over the following weeks, Michael made tentative attempts at boundary setting that Eleanor steamrolled with practice ease. He'd start conversations about visiting schedules and end up agreeing to her demands. He'd begin to defend my parenting decisions and get talked out of his position within minutes. She's just so convincing, he told me after one particularly frustrating encounter. She makes everything sound reasonable. That's what manipulative people do, I replied. They make unreasonable demands sound like common sense, but the result is still the same. Your mother gets what she wants, and our family gets disrupted. The breaking point came when Eleanor announced she was planning James's first birthday party, an event still 8 months away, and had already booked a venue without consulting us. She what? I asked when Michael reported this development. She said she wanted to make sure we got the good location at the country club. She's already put down a deposit. Did you tell her that James's first birthday party isn't her decision to make? I tried, but she said it was her gift to us, and since she's paying for it, she should have input on the details. Input or complete control. Michael's silence was answer enough. That evening, I wrote a letter that I hand-delivered to Eleanor's house. Not because I wanted to engage in further conversation, but because I wanted my position to be absolutely clear and documented. Eleanor, the letter began, I appreciate your desire to celebrate James's milestones, but his birthday party will be planned by his parents according to our preferences and budget. Please cancel whatever arrangements you've made, as we will not be attending a party we didn't plan or approve. In the future, all events involving James require advanced coordination with both parents. Thank you for understanding. I signed it simply Sarah and left it in her mailbox. Her response came in the form of a phone call to Michael that I could hear from across my small living room. Your wife is completely out of line. Eleanor's voice carried clearly through his phone. I was trying to do something nice for my grandson, and she's treating me like some kind of stranger. Mom, maybe you should have asked us before booking anything, Michael said, his voice tired but finally firm. I shouldn't have to ask permission to throw a party for my own grandchild. He's not your child, Mom. He's ours. And we get to decide how his birthdays are celebrated. The silence that followed was so long I thought the call had been disconnected. When Eleanor spoke again, her voice was cold with a particular fury of someone whose authority has been definitively challenged. I see. Well, I suppose this is what I should expect when my son chooses his manipulative wife over his own family. I'm not choosing anyone over anyone, Michael replied, and I felt a surge of hope at the steady certainty in his voice. I'm setting boundaries that protect my family. Sarah is my family, Mom. James is my family. And if you can't respect that, then we have a problem. After he hung up, Michael sat quietly on my couch for a long time, staring at the phone like it had delivered news of a death. How do you feel? I asked gently. Awful, he admitted, and relieved, and scared that she'd never forgive me. She might not, I said honestly. Some people can't love you unless they can control you. But the people who truly love you will respect your boundaries even when they don't like them. That night, Michael stayed for dinner, the first meal we'd shared since my move. We talked about practical things, his plans to find an apartment, the logistics of co-parenting, the possibility of counseling to help us rebuild trust. But mostly, we talked about James, who was babbling happily in his bouncy seat completely, unaware that his parents were finally learning to put his well-being ahead of other people's expectations. The new keys to my independence sat on the kitchen counter, catching the light from the window. Soon, there might be different keys to a home Michael and I chose together, free from anyone else's claim or control. But for now, these keys were enough. They opened the door to a life where my voice mattered, my instincts were trusted, and my child's needs came first. That was more than enough to build on. James's first birthday photo shows a healthy, happy 1-year-old with chocolate cake smeared across his face and pure joy in his dark eyes. The party was small, just Michael and me, a few friends from my teaching days, and Mrs. Rodriguez with her family, but it was perfect in ways Eleanor's country club extravaganza never could have been. The photo sits on my desk in my new classroom at Lincoln Elementary, where I've been teaching full-time since September. Principal Morrison had called in March with an offer I couldn't refuse. My old position was opening up again, and the school board specifically requested my return. The reading program you developed is still the most successful intervention we've ever implemented, she'd explained. We've had inquiries from other districts asking to replicate your methods. Would you consider coming back to lead a pilot program expansion? I'd said yes before she finished the question. Michael and I moved into a new house together 6 months ago, a modest colonial in a different neighborhood, with no family history or mother-in-law's spare keys. We chose it together, furnished it according to our preferences, and established routines that prioritize our family's needs over anyone else's expectations. Eleanor has maintained a careful distance since the birthday party boundary incident. She sends gifts for James on holidays, delivered through Michael with no accompanying visits or commentary. She asks about his development in brief, polite phone calls that Michael handles privately. She's never acknowledged her role in his premature birth or apologized for dismissing my labor symptoms, but she's also never again questioned my fitness as a mother. I think she finally understands that criticism of you means less access to James, Michael observed after her most recent call. She's choosing relationship over being right. Progress, I agreed, though I remained skeptical about the durability of Eleanor's newfound restraint. The marriage counseling had been harder than either of us expected. Dr. Chun pushed Michael to examine patterns he'd never questioned, and she pushed me to rebuild trust I thought was permanently shattered. The process was exhausting, illuminating, and ultimately transformative. You both learned survival strategies in your families of origin that worked for you as children but became destructive in your marriage. Dr. Chun had explained during one particularly difficult session. Michael learned to keep peace by avoiding confrontation, which meant Sarah's concerns went unheard. Sarah learned to earn love by being perfect, which meant she accepted unacceptable treatment rather than risk rejection. It took months of weekly sessions for Michael to understand that keeping peace with his mother wasn't actually peaceful if it meant constant conflict with his wife. It took just as long for me to believe that I could set boundaries and still be loved. That being difficult was sometimes necessary and always acceptable. James celebrated his first birthday, having no memory of his terrifying start in life. His medical checkups show a completely healthy toddler who's meeting every developmental milestone. He sleeps through the night, eats enthusiastically, and toddles around our new house with the confidence of someone who's never doubted that his needs matter. He's so secure, Dr. Patterson observed during his one-year checkup. Whatever you've been doing at home is working beautifully. He's clearly thriving in a stable, responsive environment. The teaching award has a place of honor in our new living room, displayed alongside photos of my students and certificates from education conferences. Michael had suggested we put it there, recognizing its importance in ways he'd never understood before counseling. I want James to grow up knowing his mother is accomplished and respected in her profession, he'd said while hanging it on the wall. I want him to know that both his parents have meaningful work that makes a difference. The voice recording app is still on my phone, though I rarely need it anymore. Michael has learned to hear me the first time I express concerns, and we've developed communication patterns that don't require documentation for validation. But having it there serves as a reminder that my voice matters, my perceptions are valid, and I have tools to protect myself if anyone tries to convince me otherwise. Last month, a young teacher at my school came to me for advice about her relationship with her boyfriend's family. She described patterns that sounded achingly familiar, constant criticism disguised as helpfulness, medical opinions that overrode professional advice, suggestions that she wasn't quite suitable for their families, expectations. Trust your instincts, I told her, sharing the same advice Nurse Patricia had given me in the hospital. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And don't let anyone convince you that your concerns are invalid just because they're inconvenient. I gave her Janet's card and Caroline Webb's contact information, tools for protection, documentation, and advocacy that every woman should have access to, but too many discover only after crisis forces them to fight for their own well-being. The house deed to our new home shows both our names in equal lettering, but more importantly, it represents a space we created together without outside interference. James's nursery has the thermostat set to his comfort, not his grandmother's preferences. The kitchen reflects our cooking style, not someone else's standards. The living room arranges furniture for our family's convenience, not for passing white glove inspections. Sometimes I think about the woman I was 3 years ago, so eager to please that she sacrificed her career and her instincts to fit into someone else's vision of the perfect wife. She wasn't weak or naive. She was trying to build a life using strategies that had worked in other contexts, but became destructive when applied to controlling people who mistook kindness for permission to dominate. That woman learned a hard lesson about the cost of silence and the danger of prioritizing other people's comfort over her own well-being. But she also learned that maternal instincts are powerful advocates, that documentation can protect against gaslighting, and that sometimes the people who claim to love you must be taught how to respect you. James will grow up in a home where both parents' voices matter, where medical advice trumps family tradition, and where being difficult is acceptable when difficulty is what's needed to protect the people you love. He'll learn that love includes respect, that family membership isn't conditional on silence, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to accept unacceptable treatment. Most importantly, he'll learn that his mother fought for his well-being from the moment he was conceived, trusted her instincts even when others dismissed them, and never stopped believing that he deserved better than what others thought was good enough. The teaching award, the house deed, the birthday photos, and even the unused recording app all tell the same story. Some battles are worth fighting, some truths are worth telling, and some people are worth the hard work of setting boundaries and demanding respect. 1 year later, we are all exactly where we need to be,